everyone, Ruby Ravel here. After my last video in which I briefly mentioned progressions and progress charts, I had a number of you reach out saying, well, that's a very fascinating subject, Ruby, and one we've not really heard much about and don't have much information on. Would you kindly make a video on progressions and progress charts? And verily I say unto you, yes, I will. Because it's a subject I'm currently studying and which I've found really quite earth-shattering and revelatory in terms of its ability to help me understand the different eras and epochs that I have gone through in my own life. So yeah, that is what today's video will be about, and I hope you will enjoy it. One of the things that attracts me to astrology above and beyond all other esoteric systems is that it recognizes that life is built upon constant change and transmogrification, that things are never staying the same, are never fixed and stable, but are always either gradually or suddenly in the process of turning into something else. And astrology recognizes some of the duality between the fixity of archetypal images versus the changes and personal evolutions that we are all permanently going through, whilst many different religious and philosophical systems have attempted to try and find these immutable moral laws that say that we should always act and behave and respond to life in a certain way. Astrology actually says, well, no, life is constantly changing. We go through different periods, we go through different experiential phases in our life which demand different reactions and responses and codes of conduct for us. There is no one-size-fits-all behavior that will really work. Rather, we constantly have to adapt ourselves according to what life is demanding from us, but also how we are choosing to respond to those demands at the same time. So even though we all have a natal chart, a horoscope that is this perfect picture frozen in time of what the heavens were doing at the precise moment of our birth, we are not simply that frozen picture. That horoscope represents a blueprint showing the environmental and exospatial conditions into which we are born, but also the different channels and avenues down which we are likely to grow and how those will unfold. But many of us may look at our natal charts from time to time and feel, well, maybe this described someone I once was, or a way in which I once felt and navigated and responded to the world, but there are many times when I look at it and this chart almost looks like the chart of a stranger. I feel like I have gone in very different directions and evolved in different ways that aren't necessarily reflected in the symbols I find herein. And this is why understanding progress charts is so useful. Progress charts show not who we are, but where we are now at a given point in our life. They show the stages of our evolution as they slowly unfold. And this is one of the things that can make progress charts sometimes difficult and more complex to navigate, is that they really do map those long, slow processes of unfoldment and personal growth and transformation. We can all have those different transits, whether they be momentary mood fluctuations caused by the moon or longer two-year periods triggered by the outer planets, in which we go through certain very powerful experiences that change us. But sometimes those experiences can often not leave as deep as a mark as we'd expect them to. Sometimes it can feel like we've gone through a tunnel and we've come out the other end, and we look back on that period and we think, well, what the hell was going on with me there? However, if we looked at our life as a whole, we would see these gradual changes, this gradual maturation process in which we've slowly turned from one thing to another, in which there hasn't been this sudden, abrupt Uranian change in which an old version of us died and a new one was brought into being. Rather, those processes of death, growth and rebirth are slower. And the great value of the progress chart is that it can help us to anchor ourselves in those gradual changes and personal progressions. Now that I've waffled on in my accustomed matter, I can get down to the more of the technical, boring nitty-gritty of what a progress chart actually is and how it works. So there are two main types of progress charts. There's one that is known as secondary progressions, or just a general progress chart, and then there are solar arc directions. So the technique behind secondary progressions is this. So you have your natal chart for the time of your birth. Well, secondary progressions operate on the principle of every year equaling a day since the moment of your birth. So if you were born, like I was, August 28th, 1990, then by the time you reached August 28th, 1991, your whole chart would have moved forward the same degree that it did a year after your birth. So that whole year would then be August 29th. A lot of this is much easier to understand on paper, but then via description, but that's basically the way it works. So if you were then 30 years old, then your progress chart would be a picture of what the heavens were doing 30 days after your birth. The good news is that because we live in the digital age, you are no longer responsible for actually sitting down with an ephemeris table and doing all of the different calculations that are necessary for drawing up a progress chart. If you go online, there are plenty of programs that will calculate your progress chart for you. To me, the very best website if you want to do some of your own astrologizing is astrodienst.com, also known as astro.com. There is an extended chart selection on there where there is a drop-down box of all the different chart types you could possibly ever want. From composite charts to harmonics to all kinds of ultra-esoteric things that I've never heard of and don't fully understand. But if you scroll down in that drop-down box, there is one that says progress chart. If you click on that, it will then show you where your progress chart is now. But you can also alter the dates so that you can do a bit of background digging and see what your progress chart was doing at any given point in your life, or even in your future life. The other type of progression is a solar arc direction chart. This one operates on much more simple principles that every year the whole chart moves forward by a degree. And this is the big difference. In a progress chart, you will gradually see the inner planets, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Mars and Venus moving forwards, as well as the cardinal points. But the outer planets won't move very much, maybe just a few degrees in a lifetime. So Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, Pluto, you won't see a great variation in how far they actually move throughout the entire course of your lifetime. In a solar arc direction chart, everything moves forward by a degree every year. So within the space of 60 years, even Pluto would then therefore move 60 degrees through a chart. However, in this video, I'm mostly going to focus on secondary progressions, progress charts, because those are the ones that I understand more fully. I would like to do much more research into the differences in a solar arc direction chart before I attempted to make a video about them. The very first time I looked at my progress chart was back in 2020 during lockdown, and it was a huge shock because it looked so different from everything that I understood about myself astrologically. It sent my head spinning. I felt like I'd just been lobotomized and had my head filled with a whole aquarium of angry and confused crayfish. It took me a few days to recover before I could actually sit down and kind of try and look at the chart and go, okay, what does this mean? But it was also a revelatory experience for me, because I could also understand why my life had now moved into directions that felt very different from what I understood about myself from my natal horoscope. You know, my sun is in Virgo in the chart, it was in Libra, my rising sun is Aquarius, here it was in Aries, my natal Mars is in Taurus, in there it was in Gemini, my natal Venus is in Leo, and now it was in Virgo. So many things had shifted, and it took a while before I felt like my consciousness could shift enough to kind of look at myself and say, okay, I've changed a lot, and I am not the person who I thought I was, and I am clearly being pressured and pushed by the universe to go into a different direction than the one I had written and constructed for myself in my own personal narrative. I think the easiest place to begin in terms of trying to map out some of the changes that a progressed chart points to is by looking at the progressed moon. The motion of the other progressed planets and angles is very slow, and the progressed planets can easily spend 30 years or even more if they've gone retrograde before they change sign, and only change aspects to other planets in the natal chart very, very slowly. But as the moon moves 12 degrees roughly every day, in the progressed chart it moves 12 degrees every year. So if you were born with your moon at 10 degrees Capricorn, by the time you were 1 year old, then your moon would have been at 22 degrees Capricorn. By the time you were 2 years old, your moon would have progressed to 2 degrees Aquarius. So the progressed moon spends roughly 2.5 years progressing through each sign of the zodiac, and can spend therefore about 27.5, 28 years before it makes a full lunar return in your chart. So if we look at where the progressed moon is at our progressed chart, it can really give us a strong sense of some of the emotional and experiential flavour of what might be going through, encountering, experiencing or responding to over 2.5 year periods. So my first assignment for you, for those of you who are watching this video and really only engaging with the process of trying to understand their progressed chart for the first time, I say look at your progressed chart and see where the progressed moon is, and also map out what aspects it would be making to your natal chart. This is the reason why progressed charts get complicated, because you don't solely look at them as a solitary separate chart, though you can do that. You also look at the way in which they interact and make cross aspects back to your natal chart. And I think many of us can often find it complex enough just to juggle all of the different lines and connections that are occurring in our natal charts without starting to overlap them with other people's. But even just looking at the sign through which your progressed moon is going through in your progressed chart at the moment, and the aspects it is making within that chart and the signs it is inhabiting, can still help to add some extra coloration and detail about where you are at in this point in your life now, and the things that may be of greatest priority to you or of the most experiential urgency. And as a little homework, just to really try and understand how the progressed moon maps out and impacts your life, just go back through your chart and think about certain pivotal experiences you might have had during different years and different times, and try and guess, just from the flavour of that experience, what your progressed moon may have been, and then actually go back and click on it and see where it was in that year and the aspects it was making, and try and make sense of why it expressed yourself in your life in that way, in the way that it did. Because this is such a big, complex subject, I think I'm going to have to do this as a series of videos, focusing more forensically on each little element of the progressed chart. So I'm going to just spend the rest of this video discussing the progressed moon and giving some real-life examples from my life and from other people, just to help making this stop sound like a bunch of convoluted, impossible to understand theory, and put it into the realm of lived experience that we can all understand, empathize, and identify with. So natally, our moon depicts our emotional nature, our emotional temperament, and the things and energies that we need to seek out and express in order to nurture and comfort ourselves. And the sign in which the moon is in, the house in which the moon is in, and the aspects that it makes to other planets strongly colour our emotional temperament and the things in which we take comfort. So when the moon progresses into a different sign from the one in which we inhabit in our natal chart, it's almost like we are being challenged to grow and to become comfortable in an area that might actually feel alien, foreign, inhospitable, and unfamiliar to us, but which will help us to then develop new skills, new abilities, and new hardwired unconscious reactions for knowing how to respond to and survive through different elements and areas of life. Naturally, if the moon is progressing through a sign that is the same element or has similar qualities to our natal moon, then those phases might be quite fun and rewarding or feel much more natural and effortless. However, when the progressed moon is progressing through a sign that is very different from your natal placement, it is usually those periods that can be the most difficult and which can really force us to mature and grow in different ways, because it is so different from our instinctual responses and beliefs about what life is about and how life should be. And we'll often find that during those periods, we will naturally attract a lot of people who represent the energies of that sign, as though they are our teachers telling us how to acclimatize and accustom ourselves to those energies, even if they may be teachers we are often in antagonism or conflict with. It can tell us a lot about the way our relationships function during that 2.5-year period, and what we need to learn, and the new way in which we need to learn how to emotionally nurture ourselves and respond to life. Okay, I'm going to start with a personal example. So in my natal chart, I have moon in Sagittarius, so I'm someone who is naturally oriented towards finding comfort in higher knowledge, in spirituality, in religion, in philosophy. In general, if I'm going through any kind of personal problem or emotional crisis, my way of dealing with those issues is by trying to find the higher meaning and purpose behind what I am experiencing. So I'll kind of ask myself, why am I attracting this experience? What is the lesson that I'm meant to be learning from this experience? And how can I use this as a positive opportunity for personal growth? So there's that desire to kind of understand emotions by reading the symbolic and the spiritual into them, by taking them to a higher echelon of thought. But it also means sometimes moon in Sagittarius people like myself, being a mutable sign, can also rely on their charm and their persuasion and their ability to suddenly reinvent themselves to get out of nasty issues and commitments. Moon in Sagittarius doesn't like to be tied down or stuck in situations which it finds unpleasant, because it is so oriented towards the things it considers to be greater and higher in life. It can often have a natural aversion to anything that seems too petty, too mundane, too small, too, gross and earthly. It wants to be the one engaged in solving the big, important philosophical questions of life. It doesn't want to have to be the one who's doing the accounting and taking bags of clothes to the laundry. It would much rather be focused on the big, nice, important, fun things. Thank you very much. When I first looked at my progressed chart, my progressed moon was in Capricorn, and that period was a big shock for me, because I found that my usual habitual responses for dealing with life, or for running away from my problems and simply redesigning myself as someone new altogether, no longer worked. I mean, for starters, we were in the middle of lockdown, so there was nowhere I could run away to. I was stuck in a house with a few other people. My big social network had shrunk down to just a few individuals. So my self-image previously had been as a glamorous, wandering musician who was always on the road, just poetically and spontaneously drifting from one magical, fated experience to the next, living life in this carefree, unplanned way. And I found that during this period, I could no longer respond to life in this way whatsoever. I attracted a lot of people to me who were very Capricornian or Saturnian in nature. So a lot of the people who were around me at that time were people who either had Capricorn moon in their own natal charts, or who had Saturn very strongly placed in their birth charts as well, sometimes sitting directly on the rising, or being very closely in aspect to their personal planets. And these people had no time and no patience for my big Sagittarian musings and constant desire just to run away from my problems and find something that was funner and to find the greener grass on the other side of the horizon. They very bluntly and unsympathetically told me what an undeveloped, immature child I was, who had yet to confront the harsh necessities of reality, which was very true, even though I did not appreciate that blunt, tough love and harsh wisdom at the time. But gradually, after resisting this feeling that my big, large, expansive life was being crammed into a narrower and more constricted desert, from feeling like I had once been this roamer of the Himalayan mountain ranges of the mind, to being this person who was being trapped in this small box of hardship and duty, I gradually realized there was no getting out, that I had to learn to be more Saturnine and to respond to those meticulous details of material reality that I'd been putting off, that I couldn't just live this unplanned, romantic, spontaneous life all the time, but that I had to live according to plans and routines and prepare for the future, and to learn to grapple with those issues such as money and work, and just having to survive through the many difficulties that I was going through at the time. And precisely because I was surrounded by so many very tough-minded, stoic Capricornian people, none of them allowed me to lean on them. None of them were there to be a comforting Jovian figure who was willing to do any of the hard work for me. I had to be in solitude. I had to learn to carry the atlas-shaped burdens of the sky by myself. Even though it was a very painful and lonely period in which my life comprised mostly of hard work and isolation, and very little else to leaven the malice of that Saturnine load, it still taught me and transformed me in a huge way that has now helped me to deal and know how to respond to an area of life that previously I had just disowned and shut myself off from completely. In contrast, my progressed moon is currently in Aquarius, and the ingress of that progression roughly aligned with when I first came out as trans and started exploring that side of my gender identity before ultimately deciding that I wanted to commit to hormonal therapy so that I could live my life as a woman. Because I think during the previous Capricorn moon progression, I'd gone through this period where I was very self-contained, where I felt very self-guarded and cynical and suspicious of the world because I felt everyone was treating me so harshly and coldly at the same time. I learned to become harsh and cold too. And anything that was precious or sensitive or vulnerable within me, I learned to build this big, solid, impregnable wall around. And yet the fact that that in turn kind of forced me so deeply inside of myself also made me more aware of the parts of myself that I was hiding. If I was feeling the pressure to put a more normal and conservative and responsible, mature face to the world that would be accepted by the status quo, I was also aware of the things within me that didn't fit within that image. And it's almost like once I reached Aquarius, my progressed moon reached Aquarius, it was like, okay, I'm in a world now in which I feel I can actually openly express and experiment and explore the more idiosyncratic, eccentric, and non-conformist parts of my identity, and ultimately start to display and share them with the world. And because Aquarius is all about finding comfort in like-minded groups of people through impersonal relationships, if previously I had felt very isolated and alone, when I came out as trans, I found that not only did that suddenly make me part of the LGBTQ community, and that there was now suddenly a whole group in society that I could consider myself a member of, which I couldn't before. Being publicly recognized as a woman also meant that I could now connect with the sisterhood of womanhood at large as well. So doorways and groups that had previously felt inaccessible or closed off to me were now opened up to me. And if before I had found socially interacting with people quite a painful and difficult and guarded process, as that moon has progressed through Aquarius, I found it easier and easier to recognize my common humanity in everyone. Aquarius is the sign in which we recognize that we're all humans, that no matter how diverse our external or internal experiences may be, there are still common archetypes and experiences and struggles which we all have to go through and which unite us. So previously I was someone who was actually terrified of crowds and had a largely hostile attitude towards any collective groups whatsoever. With the advent of this progression, I now feel that you could drop me into a group of people anywhere on the planet and I would find some way of bonding and connecting and learning to relate with them and probably end up making friends and having a good connection. Because whilst this time my progressed moon has been going through Aquarius, has been in opposition to my natal Venus, has been a time in which my romantic relationships have suffered and which I've really struggled, if not found it impossible to find potential romantic partners after my last relationship ended. It has been a period in which I found it almost ridiculously easy to make new friends and contacts. Aquarius rules friends and friendship groups. And during this period, it's felt like I can just go out the door and suddenly I make a new friend. I make a new acquaintance, a new associate who makes my life just that little bit larger. And in turn, a lot of the people I've been attracting into my life have been people who've been more politically liberal, who've been more idiosyncratic, who live more unusual lives or have more unusual vocations or perhaps more erratic, uncertain and experimental ways of expressing themselves. I often haven't sought out these people. It's almost felt like they've sought me out. And that's part of some of the magic of the progressed moon, is that it just seems to put out those energies and you end up attracting them to you, whether you like them or not. And then therefore they end up strongly colouring and accentuating your memories and experiences of a given period of your life. So that this doesn't become completely self-indulgent, I'm going to give you some made-up examples now of different progressed moon experiences. Let's imagine someone who has the moon in Gemini natally. When I think of Gemini, I think of a nervous feathered thing, of a butterfly that flits restlessly here, yon, and thither, or of, one of those anxious little birds that you always see just hopping from one branch to the other without staying in a single place for very long. Being an air sign, Moon in Gemini is a feathered thing with wings, but emotions and feelings are watery by nature. What happens if wings become too waterlogged? It's harder to fly. And that says a lot about the way that Moon in Gemini relates to emotions. It's often uncomfortable with straightforward emotional expression or with digging too deeply into its own feelings or other people's. Like most air signs, it prefers a degree of cerebral detachment when it's dealing with all of these matters. Air signs care a lot about having a sense of mental and cognitive clarity, and emotions are known to mess up the clarity of our thinking. As a result, the way that Moon in Gemini relates to the problem of having emotions is to distance itself from them, is to intellectualize them instead of feeling them. When Moon in Gemini has an emotional problem or issue, its response is to want to talk about it, is to analyze it, is to look at it critically, is to go to other people and have long rambling conversations in which they can intellectually explore whatever emotional conundrum they are having from all these different sides. The process of taking emotions and translating them into words and into an interpersonal sociable experience makes difficult emotions more manageable for Moon in Gemini, but also being nervous and wanting to stay constantly on the move, never wanting to feel like it's tied down, because Moon in Gemini likes to feel breezy and light-hearted and as though it has the freedom to go wherever it wants to go. It's also terrified of any emotional situations or relationships that feel too cloying, too clingy, too sentimental, which feel like they're going to tie it down and inhibit its freedom. Therefore, it's mostly going to find it easier to emotionally connect with other people who are more cerebral and intellectual in nature, people who know how to articulate their thoughts and how to articulate their feelings in a rational and reasonable manner without getting all lovey-dovey or crying or having a tantrum. Those are the things that instinctively make Moon in Gemini want to run a million miles and find a new crowd and network of people who it can rely upon not to create such emotional scenes and dramas. So if this hypothetical Moon in Gemini person had a lunar progression through another air sign like Libra or Aquarius, or through the third, 7th or 11th houses, they might find that those periods, those 2.5-year periods, are ones in which they feel like they can more or less be themselves, in which things are flowing in a way that makes sense to them, even if it might be opening them up to experiences that are slightly different to ones that they're accustomed to. It's still in the same elemental realm. But what happens if this Moon in Gemini person then experiences, after its 2.5-year period of a progression through Libra, moves into Scorpio? If normally it likes to have breezy, light-hearted, cerebrally detached connections with people, it might find that during that period, that is no longer an option. It might find that in its personal relationships, it keeps attracting people who are brooding, who are emotionally intense, who don't articulate everything and openly and clearly, but who may be more on the secret and enigmatic side, and who see the sharing or the withholding of information not as fun, trivial gossip to be talked about to make life more airy and interesting, but as something that involves machinations, responding to power. They might find that they go through periods in which they go through big emotional crises. Maybe there is a death in the family, or a big financial difficulty, or just something that really cuts at the very heart of their life in such a way that they can no longer go about things with the same nervous but breezy self-confidence. Usually when they can run away from their emotions or intellectualize them, they now find that they can't, that they are pulled down into the deep, dark depths of their soul, and they can't run away, because wherever they go, whatever demons they're trying to flee from are facing them, or are always chattering to them within. They realize that not everything in life can be resolved rationally and easily and breezily and lightly, that some things require us to go deep down into the inferno of our own personal feelings and to just keep digging and digging and digging and digging until we make some kind of determined breakthrough for whatever big existential crisis that we're enduring. They realize that some of the problems in life are feeling-based, they are irrational, they are mystical, they deal with worlds that are other than this one. If previously they had primarily a very rational, a very scientific view of the world, they might suddenly find that they're interested in things that, you know, not just nice little rational literary things. Instead, they want to dig deep into the unknown, into political corruption, into the occult, into esoterica, into mystical religions, into revolutionary politics. They want to go into those realms of the dark instead of always flitting about in those breezy realms of light. They might find that the kinds of relationships that they attract or have during that period are also very different to the ones that they would normally want. Moon in Gemini usually has a knack for getting into and out of relationships very quickly, because what it is ultimately wanting from its emotional connection with someone else is intellectual stimulation. They can get bored of people very easily. They can spend a bit of time with someone, feel like, okay, I've learned everything there is to learn from this person. I've had every range of experience I could have with this person, but I don't feel like I'm going to learn any more by sticking around with this person. In fact, you know, the critical side of my Mercury is coming out now, and I'm noticing lots of little details about this person that are giving me the ick. So, oh, that person over there looks colourful and interesting. I'm going to hop out of this relationship and go into this one. So Moon in Gemini is not typically known for its staying power, because its restless need for novelty and for new experiences and for new connections is where it finds its comfort. Its home is in the new. Its home is on the move, not in merely just staying and building a long-term connection with things that feel stable and familiar. To Gemini, stability and familiarity often feels like a kind of death, something that is killing the restless curiosity of its mind. But during the progress period through Scorpio, it might find that it can no longer just come and go from those relationships as easily as it did. It might find instead that instead of feeling reasonably detached from people and mostly quite independent, it instead starts to become deeply emotionally fixated and attached, and to feel quite dependent on the people that it loves or have feelings for. If it's used to, you know, love being quite a light-hearted thing, it might now feel like it's this thing that is taking it into the most infernal depths of itself, something that is revealing that it is not always a rational, secure and easygoing person, but that actually it can be just as irrational, just as manipulative, just as brooding, and just as obsessive as the rest of us can be when we have something that we deeply want and either can't have it or do have it but are terrified of it being taken away from us. So we've looked at the progressed moon changing signs. Let's look at the progressed moon moving through houses and how that can colour the experiences we might be having at given times. Let's imagine someone who has the moon in the 5th house natally, which has energies that are similar to Leo. People with moon in the 5th house are usually creative people. They are people who feel that life should be about personal creative expression, about having a good time, about having fun, about having a laugh, about engaging with life as though it were a big game or a big joke. You know, the philosophy is to live la dolce vita, that life should be about enjoying and celebrating yourself and your unique individuality. This might be someone who's a great composer or a great artist, someone who likes to live in a big way. You know, they're always going to pub quizzes, they're always going to big rock concerts, they're always going to see stand-up comedians. You know, it just feels like every spare moment that they have, they are spending it doing something big, extroverted and fun. They enjoy being the center of attention, they enjoy being on stage and being celebrated and applauded by other people. They may generally have a humorous and comical and jovial attitude towards life. They love improvising and doing spontaneous things. And they may also have quite a self-indulgent lifestyle, enjoying good food, good wine, and good loving, and not wanting to stint or cut back on anything that brings them that joy and that sense of self-validation that they are living their brightest, biggest, and best life. Now let's imagine that this person experiences the moon progressing into the 6th house. They might find that their environmental circumstances change significantly when this progression occurs. If previously they had the wherewithal and the free time and the resources to live the life that they desired, they might find now suddenly they have to make cutbacks. Perhaps they lose the job they have, which was well paid, or they suffer a big financial loss, which means that they no longer have the free time and the expenditure to do all of these fun, elaborate things. Suddenly, they may find that actually they need to cut back, they need to be more frugal, they need to be more economical, they can't just deal with things blithely and trust that the details will take care of themselves. No, they find that if they don't take care of the details, then even worse things continue to happen to them. So they have to learn to respond to life in a more mercurial, Virgoan, 6th house way. Or they might find when the moon progresses into the 6th house that all of those years of living in leisure and debauchery and extravagance have come back to have come back and taken their toll. They find that they suddenly have a big health crisis and they can no longer carry on eating those rich foods and having the best wines, several bottles of the best wines every night. They can't carry on going out burning the candle at both ends. They find it's really affecting their mental and their physical well-being. They find that they have to learn to live a smaller, narrower life, that they can't just do everything spontaneously and do all the things, fun things they want to do. They might have to cut back down, learn to be much more conscientious and mindful about how they look after their body and how they look after their mind. You know, they may even develop a condition like diabetes, where they really have to be very rigorous about controlling their blood sugar and living a kind of a balanced, nuanced, and well thought out lifestyle if they don't want to have a serious health crisis. So that shows how someone who's been brought up to respond to life in one way can experience a big fluctuation when they have a progression through a house that is very different, if not inimical, to their natal nature. The other main thing to observe in monitoring the motions of the progressed moon is to observe the aspects to your placements in the natal charts that it makes through that time period. So it's usually easiest to do this if you get both charts up together on a computer, and then you can calculate the aspects yourself. I'm sure there are probably some options that do it for you, but I always prefer to do it manually, just so I make sure that nothing is missed. And I always use a 10-degree orb of influence either side of a main transit, either side of a main aspect, like a conjunction, opposition, trine, or square. So, for instance, if you had Pluto at 15 degrees Scorpio, and you had Moon at 5 degrees Scorpio, I would consider that within orb of a conjunction. And obviously gradually it will get closer and closer to Pluto before it becomes exact, and then it would separate after the Moon had reached 25 degrees Scorpio. So you're giving it an orb of influence 10 degrees either side. I know that other astrologers prefer to use a smaller margin of influence, but I feel that is not efficacious for me. So an aspect between the progressed moon and the natal chart can therefore then last as long as 20 months altogether. So the aspects that the progressed moon makes while it's travelling through a given sign or house is going to strongly affect how easily or how antagonistically it is able to express its energy. So always make sure you look at these. You know, if you look at things too broadly, you can often trick yourselves that things are going to be easier than they are. You might see the moon about to progress through Sagittarius and say to yourself, oh, well, this is going to be, the next 2.5 years are going to be super fun. I'm going to have a great time. I'm going to go traveling. I'm going to explore different cultures. I'm going to learn about new philosophies that I've never learned about before. Maybe I'll go back to university and study a subject that I feel would really open up my mind and give me new opportunities about things I could do in the future. But if for the majority of its progression through Sagittarius, it's going to be in square or opposition to a difficult planet, like Uranus or Pluto or Saturn, you might find that isn't quite the easy, carefree, exploratory, expansive, fortunate, benevolent period you hoped it was going to be. So do look at the aspects to the natal charts to understand other experiences and other influences and other people that might be coming into your life through that period. To give another example about me, for the majority of the period that my moon has been progressing through Aquarius, it has been in square to my natal Pluto. So you might look at someone who's got their moon progressing into Aquarius and think, oh, well, this person's going to have a period in which they feel much more intellectually detached and, able to deal with their emotions, but by looking at them from a more cognitive angle, someone who's going to feel more equable and reasonable and just mostly focused on, exploring unusual subjects. Of course, if Pluto in Scorpio is in the picture, it's not going to be quite like that. If the moon is related to our ability to find our home in something, our ability to find comfort, difficult aspects from the moon to Pluto often indicate periods in which the things we are trying to hold on to, which give us comfort, often feel like they are being threatened, like they are being destroyed, like they are being taken away from us, and we feel like we are fighting against fate to hold on to those things that give us a sense of security and emotional nurturement. So, actually, for the majority of the period, while my moon was in square to my natal Pluto, I went through long periods where, in the demise of a breakup and during a period in which I experienced lots of deaths both in my personal and professional life, I went through a period of very difficult mental health, in which I really felt like I was having to marshal all of my resolve in order just to survive and to get through the difficult, dark, unstable times that I was going through. And I also found that I could be very obsessive and felt a lot of vengeance and anger and hatred towards me, emotions I don't normally feel towards people who I felt had let me down or abandoned me or neglected me or not been there for me emotionally in some way. And I really had to work 1,000 times harder just to keep myself under emotional control, so some of that vengeful, more extreme emotional responses did not get the better of me. However, it did mean that my mind was much more focused when it came to obsessively really penetrating to some of the deeper depths of astrology. And it was during that square that I began this astrological channel, which, if you look back from my earlier videos, is why so many of them deal with plutonic issues such as jealousy and obsession and scapegoating, and painful transformations, and all of the rest of them. So those aspects can really colour and strongly affect the degree to which you are or aren't able to fully express and embody the energies of the sign or the house that the progressed moon is going through. Finally, the last thing that you want to be aware of in tracking the progressed moon and how it may be impacting your life is to look at where Cancer is in your progressed chart, because whatever house cusp is ruled by Cancer will therefore be ruled by your progressed moon, and therefore may be subject to all of the fluctuations and moody mutability that moon is taking you through. And for many of the cadent and succedent houses, it may not be a massive deal. The ones where it's really going to make itself felt is if you have Cancer on one of the angles. So if you have Cancer rising or descending, or at midheaven, or at the Imam Sili at the bottom of the chart ruling the 4th house. So if Cancer is ruling the 1st, the 10th, the 7th, or the 4th, then paying attention to the progressed moon and how it affects those energies is going to be even more important. So again, to bring things back to me, I currently have Cancer ruling the 4th house in my progressed chart. The 4th house is related to our home life and our family life and our deepest, most vulnerable inner life. And I have found it very hard to maintain domestic stability since Cancer has started ruling my 4th house, because it feels like with every change of aspect or sign or house that the progressed moon makes, my domestic circumstances alter dramatically. But it can also lend colour to your domestic experiences during that time. So, like I said, when Capricorn moon was the ruler, during the first part of that was during lockdown, when I was living with a man who had Capricorn moon. During the second half of that, I was living in an old and very, very cold Victorian house, and Saturn rules things that are old. But not only that, during that time I was primarily a care worker, and in another apartment in that same building I was looking after an elderly lady during the last year and a half of her life. So that idea of Saturn also being connected to work and to the carrying of burdens and responsibility and to old age, all of those themes are woven in there. Whereas since Moon has been in Aquarius, I've gone back to living in a household full of other people, but in that nice, equable Aquarian way, we all get along harmoniously with one another whilst all doing our own thing. So there's a strong sense of kind of group harmony, but also proper boundaries in place at the same time. If you have Cancer rising in your progressed chart, then you might find every 2.5 years brings major changes to you in terms of your emotional output, how well you do feel you are or aren't able to engage in the world. It may even change every 2 years, or every aspect you find you really want to change your appearance, or may even want to change your vocation and what you are doing with your life. If Cancer is ruling the descendant in your progressed chart, then you might find that the relationships or the people you are attracted to is strongly coloured by what the progressed moon is doing. And likewise, if Cancer is ruling the midheaven, you might find also your relationship with the larger world, but also your career, your vocation, the work you are doing changes in accordance with what the progressed moon is doing. So whilst it will affect all of the cusps, depending on where Cancer is, it is on the angles that they will be most obviously and materially manifest. Anyway, as you can see, progress charts are complex. Very complex, which is probably why many astrologers don't talk about them, because there are many rules, there are many details that you have to focus on. It's not an easy subject just to deal with in a broad and easygoing way. It is a complicated art form because our personal changes are very complex as well. Being a human and moving in new directions is very complex. But I thought it best just to focus on this one aspect at a time, otherwise it's just going to get too overwhelming. So we've dealt with progressed moon in this episode. In other episodes I will deal with the progressed sun, I'll deal with progressed rising and the changing of the angles in general. Might also look at progressed Mercury, progressed Venus, progressed Mars, and yeah, all of the above. If there's anything that you want me to explain, or if there's any aspect of progress charts that you'd like me to explore more, please let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you were able to understand it. I appreciate there's a lot there that requires digesting. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe so that I can get more viewers to my channel. If you'd like to contact me for a personal astrological reading, you can message me at thestarsunraveled@outlook.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Astrology and Underwear, and you can support me on Patreon at www.patreon.com/thestarsunraveled. All of those addresses will be in the box below this video. So if you didn't hear them, just look in that box and they are there. Anyway, enjoy looking at your progressed moon and feel free to share the results of what you've learned in the comment section below.